Quickly before I start this video essay slash review, I want to talk about controversy as currently is an element that's affecting this game. I don't want to push anything in anyone's face. I just want to, say how I feel about it. This game has had definitely one of the worst launches for a game I've ever seen, and not because the game launched in terrible condition, but because before the game launched, most of it got leaked. Spoilers were out there everywhere, and I sadly had something in the game spoiled, but I ignored it going into the game. I won't be discussing many spoilers in this essay, don't worry. There may be a few minor things, but they won't really affect any major plots in the game. But yeah, this really sucked for many people who were really excited for the game, including me. After this, I started to notice an increase in people who were slating the game or conveying it in a negative light. This was not something that was particularly usual for the first game, because the first game's been portrayed as the best game ever created in most people's minds. So this sudden hate on one of the most beloved IPs definitely was a shock. All I'm trying to say here is that the unfair review bombing of calling it an SJW shit show and stuff like that, it just isn't fair. And if people are going to review this game, I think it's only fair to review this game in terms of the actual game, the story, the characters, the plot, everything. I don't think it's fair to review the game on your dislike of a certain movement or your dislike of how you believe Naughty Dog are trying to push an agenda. But without further ado, thank you for listening to that. I just felt like it should be said, and let's talk about the real part of this review. The Last of Us Part 2. The Last of Us Part 2 is a brave and risky new entry into the series that takes many things from the original and completely changes what you love, but it also keeps its core gameplay and brilliant writing. This game has already been very divisive for many, and I completely understand why. It does many things that took me by surprise. It made me angry, upset, even made me laugh. Many people have complained about how dark and depressing this game is, but I don't know how this has come as a surprise for people. The trailers proved this almost instantly. Neil Druckmann discussed how this is going to be a much darker game than the original, which was already dark at many points. Speaking of the original, The Last of Us is my favourite game of all time, like many people, and for anyone that knows me, this doesn't come as a shock. I've played through it multiple times, I've spoken people's ears off about the amount of love I have for it, and I even wrote and directed my own short film inspired from my experience with the game. It meant a lot to me when I first played it all the way back in 2013, and still today nothing has come close to taking it off that high mantle that I hold it on. So The Last of Us Part 2 was an extremely big deal for me. The multiple delays had just got me even more excited for the game, and on June 19th, I was ready. See, I personally really loved this game. From the moment the game started, I sat back in my chair with a smile on my face. The first 2 hours of this game are probably some of the best. It's incredible, the world has changed since we last saw it. Ellie and Joel have settled down and Jackson acts peaceful. But something disturbs the peace, and Ellie goes through a traumatic event, embarking on a revenge plot. So I've heard many people complain that the plot of the game is basic and unoriginal, which is definitely a fair complaint, but then again the first game isn't really an original story. It's very hard to make something original in a day like this, especially when you're coming off of a previous title. A sequel isn't easy to make original when it's carrying on from an already told story. But this game takes the plot and throws some surprises in there, and it genuinely at times is heartbreaking. Ellie is different now, she's grown up, she isn't the same kid we adored and laughed at her silly jokes, and on this adventure we're shown how brutal she can be. The characters of this game are arguably the thing that people love the most about the series. Joel and Ellie's engaging and beautiful relationship from the first game is something many other games have never been able to capture. The connection between these two is heartbreaking, and the selfish mistake that Joel makes at the end of the first game shows his love for Ellie, even if his decision was morally wrong. This bond is something that drives the sequel, and if you love the characters from the first game, then I think you'll love them here in this game as well. Although Ellie is different and broken compared to the first game, she's still the Ellie we loved, but definitely more badass. There are a few new additions in the game like Dina and Jesse. I enjoyed both of these characters, although I wasn't completely engaged with them as much as I was with Joel and Ellie in the first game. They still felt like a nice addition, but I guess you can never beat that relationship. I can't help but feel this game does put side characters and development for these characters way out of the way, and makes it harder for the audience to connect with them, because this game is so driven with seeing out Ellie's goal that these characters do just feel like a pointless addition at times. I would have liked to have been more engaged with these characters and been satisfied with how their stories played out, since the first game wrote its characters so well. A lot of people don't like the characters, which I also believe to be understandable, but Ellie's journey is a story that I believe was important to tell. The themes in the story aren't always the most subtle, but neither was the first game. If the first game was about companionship and the reasons that we should live, even in the darkest times, even when we believe there is no return, then The Last of Us Part 2 is about how the ideas of revenge and feelings of anger can consume a person, and what the darkest times actually look like, even when there is light on the other side. I believe that the theme of this game is clearly meant to be looked at through the eyes of the first game's themes. We can lose people, and even in our darkest of times, we shouldn't go to the terms that Ellie is going to. Ellie, in my eyes, isn't meant to be seen as the hero of this game. She is a villain, just alongside the antagonist of the game. There is no winner in this dark world, and going to the limits that Ellie goes to won't fix anything. Many people have complained the push for a strong female lead, which shouldn't be a problem anyway, but I don't even see that to be true in this game at all. I don't know where in this game is the idea that Ellie is meant to be someone that anyone can look up to. We root for her, yeah, but that's only because we've experienced everything she has gone through. If this story was told through the antagonist's point of view from the start, then wouldn't we be rooting for her the whole time? There is a fine line between good and bad, and Naughty Dog want to show what this dark world can really be capable of. Especially right now in a time where we are having a different crisis around every corner, I don't think this game could have come out at a better time. The gameplay, in my opinion, although not different from the first game, is still a massive jump. Once again, many people have complained, with them saying that the gameplay still feels like it's in the last generation. I will have to disagree here, because although the core gameplay loop is the same when it comes to loot, kill and survive, all these functions have been greatly improved. Surviving is a lot harder now with the enemy AI being greatly improved. I played the game on moderate for my playthrough, and the enemies were definitely hard to beat. There are larger groups than before, and they don't just shoot and wait for you to get back up and kill them. A lot of the time they can shoot you, and before you can even escape, they'll shoot you back down again. In stealth sequences, they can find you extremely easily if you're not careful, and the ability to prone makes for extremely intense situations. Just like in the E3 gameplay, when the woman checks underneath the truck and finds Ellie, this happened to me and I was dragged out afterwards. This is a huge leap from the first game where the enemy AI was seriously weak. I never really died from AI in the first game, but in this game they're definitely 10 times harder. They all have names as well, so after killing an enemy you feel the weight of taking a life, especially after the enemy calls out their name in pain. The infected AI have also been improved. You now have to walk way slower around clickers so they don't hear you, which caught me off guard in my first experience with one. There are also new infected like the Shamblers, which are cool, but after a while they don't really pose much of a threat. Stalkers are back from the first game as well, and they are 10 times more scary now, with them crawling around in the dark and with their eyes shining from your flashlight. They tend to hide from you until they see a time to strike, which can get overwhelming when there are a lot of them. The gun mechanics are fairly similar to the first game, with them being hard to use at times. Many people complain they're bad, which I do understand, but then again we are playing as a 19-year-old girl who isn't John Wick. I don't think this excuses it, but I think the gun mechanics are meant to feel hard. That's why there is little ammo in the game, and we're meant to take every shot as careful as we can, only if we think we're going to hit. The gun bench and upgrades for weapons is nice, and it's definitely something I would come back to on a new game plus and fully upgrade them all. The new skill tree system is a huge upgrade as well from the first game, with you having to find manuals now and to learn more skills. I feel like some people might not even run into some of these, missing out on some really helpful skills later down the line. Coming back to difficulty, they also added a menu which allows you to customize difficulty options, including enemies and loot spawns. I think coming back to this game, I would definitely play around with these options a lot more. The looting part of this game is fairly similar, but now instead of shivving doors open, you have to use more creative ways to get into rooms filled with loot, like rope and different ways of entry. There is also a jumping feature in the game which, although doesn't feature a ton in the game, is a nice addition and makes for some fun vertical combat and jumping puzzles. The puzzles in this game also have definitely been improved from the first game, as some people didn't like them. Although I don't mind them in this game, as they were a fundamental part of complementing the characters and the story with the gameplay, they are definitely more complex than the last of Us 2. I would love to say I was surprised that Skill Up didn't like them in this game, since they've been greatly improved and there are far less of them, but I guess I'm not. Although I never particularly struggled with them, they were far more challenging than the first game's puzzles. The combat and stealth as a whole just feels great now, with fun ways to sneak past the enemies like squeezing through small gaps or climbing above them to get a high advantage. A lot of people think stealth and combat isn't that fun, but I personally found it extremely engaging and difficult. The melee combat in this game is also satisfying, and the new types of melee weapons feel brutal to use at times, but by far my favourite part of this game is the exploring. The world, although in desolation, is something oddly beautiful. Naughty Dog always have beautiful looking worlds, and their level design is, as usual, phenomenal. I always love getting to see the next area I'm going to explore, and the troubles I'll have to face there. The world feels real, and that is a scary thought to be feeling when exploring it. A few hours into the game, there is a short open world experience in which you can find loot to continue on your adventure. The area is really fun to explore actually, and I wish there was more of this later in the game, as it was some of the best parts in the game in my opinion. Overall, I really did enjoy my time with the gameplay, and at times was excited to get back into the next encounter. So this video is probably titled A Flawed Masterpiece, which I do believe to be true, and although I've briefly mentioned a few things I didn't like, I haven't mentioned the flaws that personally stopped me from giving this game a 10 out of 10. There is a portion later in the game where the story takes an unexpected turn. This was something I wasn't particularly a fan of, and people who have played the game probably know what I'm on about. I'm going to go into minor spoilers here, but nothing that will ruin the experience of the game for you. So if you do want to play the game and go into it knowing absolutely nothing, then I would advise you turn off, but I promise it's only a portion that I'm going to spoil. So in this portion of the game, you play a character named Abby, who plays a relevance in the story early on. This is a way for the audience to learn more about this character. Although I saw the purpose in this segment of the game, I couldn't help but feel that it dragged out for far too long. The execution just isn't right, and the player is placed in a scenario that the majority of them probably don't want to be in anyway, and the segment just goes on for a good 9 to 10 hours. I wasn't engaged in the story at all, and I felt like most people would be on the same page. I feel like this is why the game has been so divisive with people who are actually reviewing it under respectable circumstances. I feel like maybe a good portion of the game was originally meant to be a DLC, and maybe Naughty Dog felt this wouldn't sell well, so they added the whole thing into the game. It's clear that a lot of this has purpose in the game and links in with the overall plot, but it definitely drags, and I couldn't help but feel that the emphasis on this part of the game didn't pay off in the end. However, there are still positives to pull from this segment of the game. Although not my favourite part of the game, it has some of the best level design and most intense gameplay. It also does have a relevance to the story, like I said. Looking at the character of Abby is actually very similar to looking at the character of Joel. Of course, many people will disagree with that, but I believe this was the sole intention of this segment of the game. Abby isn't a bad person, she's done horrible things, but so is Joel. Everyone loves Joel, and rightfully so, but he's not the hero of the story. He does an immoral thing at the end of the first game, and taking that opportunity away from Ellie was wrong. Joel's killed hundreds of people and done far worse in his past that we only ever get a glimpse of in the first game. Abby's character arc in this game is very similar to Joel's and Ellie's in the first game too. And when you see this in perspective, you can understand Naughty Dog's intention with this portion of the game. although maybe not executed properly, it has its relevance, and I think people can still look at this and appreciate what their intention was here, even if you don't like the decision. A lot of people have also complained about plot holes, which I definitely don't see, apart from one thing at the end of the game that is extremely unrealistic. Apart from that, I feel like this complaint is just another excuse to give the game shit. The main characters not constantly getting killed when the enemies couldn't kill them is a trope in so many films and games. Think about how quick Star Wars would have ended if the stormtroopers could actually aim. This is character and plot armor so that we can actually play the 20 hours of the game that has actually been created for us. However, I believe the first 10 hours of the game to honestly be some of the highest quality we've got from a game in a while, and it feels like a satisfying continuation of the first game. The last couple hours of this game are extremely satisfying. I felt like some stuff was unneeded, but it was a great ending to the story. It could end here or it could continue, but either way I'd be very happy. I'm so glad we finally got this game, and that is a great continuation of the characters and the stories we've been waiting to see for 7 years. I understand the complaints and some of the controversies of this game, and it sucks that not everyone is enjoying it, but as a lover of the first game, I do feel satisfied with this game. It's more creative, and it continues to show how incredible the people at Naughty Dog are. For me, it comes as a 8 out of 10. I will adore the first game for eternity, but this game will hold a different place in my heart. It will always be something that surprised me and hurt me, but also made me feel glad and hopeful. I will never forget it, and it will always hold a special place in my heart.